analysts and other countries have praised the Philippines' public relations efforts when it comes to publicizing China's attacks against the Philippines. But at this point, how wise would it be for the government to actually heed the call of certain camps to allow civilian vessels to join RORE missions or other similar efforts in the West Philippine Sea?
Well, for me personally, I'm not yet on that. I've not yet reached that point where I would advocate purely civilian vessels. As it is, we are using civilian vessels in the resupply missions. These are chartered by the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and they were intended to show that what we're doing there is not provocative, but clearly China does not care about the character of these vessels. The other problem with using purely civilian vessels, of course, is that civilian vessels will be subject to the jurisdiction of foreign law enforcement and military vessels. No, there's a rule in international law that they can undertake boarding and inspection measures against purely civilian vessels. And so that might actually interfere even more or give the Chinese even more ground to interfere with civilian resupply activities. However, this is something that I think should be carefully considered, no, as among the range of options that the Philippines has in continuing its resupply of the BRP Sierra Madre.
Looking at videos now showing on our screens, quite violent activity there happening in the West Philippine Sea. The U.S. has yet to come to the defense of the Philippines despite the presence of the Mutual Defense Treaty, particularly because under Article 4 of the MDT, it says that the MDT can only be triggered by an armed attack. China has been skirting this through the use of water cannons, deliberately colliding with Philippine vessels. Is it actually time for Washington and Manila to consider updating the 1951 MDT to make it somehow more responsive to current realities on the ground?
Well, I think the updating of the MDT has already been taking place. That's why we had the bilateral guidelines issued last year. As to its interpretation, no, recently the USINDOPACOM came out with its interpretation that the MDT in considering armed attacks, no, is not necessarily limited to the use of weapons. In fact, it also considers the use of any kind of means which produces injury, death, or destruction. So it would include, I believe, even the use of water cannon in the way that it is being used by China. Now, the fact that it is covered by the MDT, however, is not the only answer you need here, because there are considerations of what would be the proportional and reasonable response to a water cannon attack, no? And that's something that is left to the Philippines and the United States, really, to discuss further.
Why do you think the Philippines is quite hesitant in operationalizing or in triggering the MDT mechanism right now, given that 3 Filipino soldiers were already injured just this weekend, and earlier this year, 7 more others, or around similar to that number, also injured with a similar attack from China?
Well, the Philippines is part of an international community that is heavily interdependent, no? And so any action that introduces like major instability in the South China Sea not only will affect the Philippines and China, or even just the US, but the rest of the region as well. The idea that you can just start an armed conflict that easily, no, is something that goes back to probably the 19th century. Today in the modern world, no, you can't make those decisions easily, and you can't take these things very lightly. Besides, again, what we're thinking of here, what we consider here is the issue of reasonability and proportionality.